Before we move on to translating ordinary language into categorical logic, or propositional form, I should say, we should stop to take inventory on a particular philosophical problem within categorical logic, and that philosophical problem is known as the issue of existential import. Now, when it comes specifically to A and E propositions in which which are universal, consider the distinction between the two following claims here. So, the first statement would be something like, all cats are mammals. Oops. And this claim, all dragons are lizards that covet gold. Okay. So when we talk about existential import, what we're referring to here specifically is whether or not the actual claim is making a claim about things really in the world. So if we say something like all cats are mammals, or if we make an E claim and say no cats are reptiles, we can rest assured that this is going to be a true claim because there are such things as cats. All right. Now, the second statement, all dragons are lizards that covet gold, well, so this looks okay on a certain angle, but if later on when we talk about next week, actually argument analysis of categorical logic, it's going to become a bit of a problem when we have to think about whether or not this statement is really making any claim about the world, because in fact there are no such thing as dragons, right? So really this particular claim here has, as we say, no existential import. That is, it's not picking up on anything that really is existing in the world, right? So in philosophy of logic, there are two ways of interpreting A and E propositions, or universal propositions. The first version of this is known as the Aristotelian interpretation. And we say that the Aristotelian interpretation is, quote unquote, open to existence. So the idea here is that on the Aristotelian interpretation, A and E propositions are saying something about the world. At least that's the given, or that's the interpretation going into the analysis, is that we are actually picking up on something in the world. Now, an argument will stand or fall given by the fact that we are taking this interpretation, and if it turns out that whatever we're referring to in our proposition doesn't really exist, it may actually make our argument not a very sound argument, basically, or it might make it invalid, in fact. So that's one interpretation we take. The interpretation we're going to take in this class, and what is often taken here, is the Boolean interpretation of universal propositions. And we say that the Boolean interpretation is closed to existence. So when we make these claims, we're not saying anything about things in the world, all right? That's the general idea here. So it's just a way of interpreting these claims. Now, this has some sort of import. The existential import has import insofar as we understand what we can infer if certain categorical propositions are true. So in categorical logic, we have what was known as the square of opposition. Now, because there are two interpretations of universal claims in logic, there are actually two squares of opposition. We will assume, again, for the sake of this class, what we call modern square of opposition, which follows the Boolean interpretation of universal claims. So the general idea is something like this. On the square of opposition, let's put it this way. We would say that, certain claims are contradictory from one another, meaning that if one of these claims is true, the other claim will be false. So according to this square of opposition then here, If we know, for instance, that an A proposition is true, we can immediately infer, hence the immediate inference, that whatever the corresponding O proposition is will be false. Okay. So, if, for instance, we say all cats are mammals, then we can infer, therefore, that it is false that some cats are not mammals. Obviously, if you're making a claim about every member of the class of cats and every member of the class of mammals, then, and you're saying that they correspond, or at least, when you're making a claim about every member of the class of cats, I should say, then obviously there cannot be, if all cats are mammals, there cannot be a case where there's a cat that is not a mammal. You're completely contradicting yourself if you make that claim. So the square of opposition can tell you this and make this inference for you immediately here, right? Now, this doesn't look like much of a square, and if we take more of the Aristotelian interpretation of the square of opposition, this would be more filled out. The thing is here is that when it comes to the relationship between A and E propositions, or A and I, or E and O, or I and O, if we're trying to figure, if we want to try to make an inference about any of these other propositions, given that one of these is true, we can't really make an inference unless we know something about the world. And so we say that every other relationship here is logically indeterminate. So we'll just say Li for short here. So this is Li, Li, and Li. So if, for instance, I gave you a kind of example where I said, okay, tell me whether or not this argument is valid. And so, by the way, this particular argument here, which demonstrates the contradiction between A and O propositions, this whole argument here would be what we would call, this would be a valid argument here. All right? Because we can tell immediately from the square of opposition that A and O propositions are contradictions of one another. However, what if I said something like this? I said, okay, again here, it's true that all cats are mammals, and then I therefore conclude then that, for instance, that that it is false. Let's see, it is false that, well, let's just go with the I statement. It is false that some cats are mammals. Okay. Now you might say, yeah, but this is right? If all cats are mammals, or you would say that, excuse me, let me backtrack there. Let me try another claim there. Let's do the O statement. So, excuse me. Let's do something like, let's do the, let's see, I'm trying to find, let's do this, sorry. Let's backtrack just a tiny bit. Okay. So if I said something like I concluded then that some cats are mammals, and I asked you whether or not this was true, you might say that it's true, but you would know this not because of the logical structure of this, according to the Boolean interpretation, but you would know this to be a true or a valid argument because you know something about the world, something outside of the logical rules, the rules of inference we're learning here. You would know, you would have empirically experienced that there are cats in the world. So if I give you a claim like that, then we would have to still say that this is logically indeterminate, given the Boolean interpretation that we're going to take here in this class here. So the only thing to basically say in all of this, the thing that you should really take out of all of this here, is that if you go from two things really. One, if two propositions are contradictions of one another, then if one of them is true, the other one will be false, right? And you can make this inference immediately, given the square of the modern square of opposition. And the second thing you should learn is that If you go from a sort of universal claim to a particular claim, this will be what we would call an existential fallacy. So if we assume the Boolean interpretation, which we do, if you make a claim like this, and you say that it's a valid one, you are committing this existential fallacy here.